Hong Kong's number 2 official, John Lee, has announced his intention to run for the leadership of the city. He has resigned from his position as Chief Secretary for Administration.
If my resignation is approved by the Central People's Government, I shall plan to prepare to stand for the upcoming Chief Executive election.
Mr. Lee is a former Deputy Commissioner of Police. He was promoted to the city's second highest post in 2021. Hong Kong's chief executive election will take place on the 8th of May. Incumbent leader Carrie Lam announced this week that she would not be seeking a second term. Reports say Mr. Lee is the only candidate that Beijing is backing for the top job. And Deborah Wong joins us live from Hong Kong. Deborah, Mr. Lee was a career cop before becoming a minister. What are his qualifications for the city's top job?
Well, compared to the previous chief executives, Mr. Lee's experience in top high-level administrative roles is a relatively short one. In fact, his appointment as a chief secretary of administration last June was rather controversial. And it was so much so that Mrs. Lam had to come out to defend his appointment. And she said that, Mr. Lee's forte is in security, so he would only need to prioritize security issues, whereas she would handle the rest. And at that time, it became a very clear indication that it was Beijing's intention to shore up national security in Hong Kong. So Mr. Lee has been touted as a forerunner for this CE election, just because looking at the Hong Kong context, we're coming off the back of 2019 protests, and we're also months away from the 25th anniversary of the city's handover to China. So any future leader would need to have the know-how to navigate such sensitivities. And let's hear from an analyst what he has to say about Mr. Lee's chances.
Very likely that John Lee will be the next chief executive, and he is only choice for Beijing. Beijing wants a person in charge of Hong Kong who can deal with Hong Kong's extremely complicated external and internal environment. Externally, Hong Kong will face increasing hostility from the United States and the West.
Well, Mr. Lee spent much of his 45-year public service career in the police before becoming Undersecretary for Security in the C.Y. Leong administration. And when Mrs. Lam took over as chief executive, he was shortly promoted to the chief of security. And that role saw him front and center of the extradition bill, which eventually led to the 2019 protests. But beyond that, Mr. Lee was also an enforcer. He was a staunch defender of the Beijing-imposed national security law, which obviously scored some points with the mainland, and that led to the quelling of some social unrest, plus the arrest of many political activists. But, beyond security, in recent months, there was an attempt to kind of raise his public profile a little bit, especially in this current COVID-19 crisis. So Mr. Lee has been making trips to the mainland without the incumbent chief executive, Carrie Lam. He has gone there to discuss epidemic strategies, as well as border reopening talks. So all in all, that ongoing dialogue with the mainland shows that he has the experience and that capability to navigate Hong Kong-China diplomacy, which is something that any future leader in Hong Kong has to do so.
Oh, Deborah, members of the election committee summoned to Beijing's liaison office today. Do we know if they were given any directions on which candidate they should nominate or vote for?
Well, word on the street is that the members have been informed that Mr. Lee would be Beijing's top choice, and he would be the only candidate that they're supporting. And, they're expected to also nominate him on Friday, and that's only 2 days away. So what we're looking at here is a very compressed timeline. After months of relative silence, things are all falling into place in the last leg of the CE race. And what this also means is that it's shaping up to look very likely like a one-man show. And in fact, a government advisor, Ip Kwok Him, previously indicated that it's very difficult for candidates to secure nominations in such a compressed timeline. Now, previously, we've heard that Finance Secretary Paul Chan, as well as EXCO member Regina Ip, could express interest to run, but we haven't heard of them at this point. And in fact, Mr. Chan, just an hour ago, did congratulate Mr. Lee on his intention to run. So all in all, a very compressed timeline, a far cry from what was like in previous elections, where NEC hopefuls, announced their intention to run even before the nomination period. But this year, because of COVID-19, everything was delayed. Nomination period was gazetted pretty late. And up to last week, there was still uncertainty whether election would still go ahead. But right now, it seems like it will run as scheduled on 8th May, and it will look like a one-man show. Of course, this also begs the question of the legitimacy of a one-man show, because of a one-man show race. Because, but observers that I've spoken to say that it will still be a fair system, because Mr. Lee still has to garner more than half the votes from election committee to be considered the chief executive. And as for now, he still needs to canvass at least 188 votes from the committee to be considered nominated. Back to you.
And thanks for that. Deborah Wong reporting live to us there from Hong Kong.